In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, these brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Brian Fry, Chad Robinson, Dustin Melbardis, Lizzie Haynes, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
Welcome, all you lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable, where we watch movies and then talk about them. I'm your host, Dustin Melbardis, and joining me today is my good friend and co-host, Brian Fry. Brian, are you excited to hear all the Christmas music in the air?
You know, I do one thing every year where I do a deep dive into, and I call this practice Christmas music I can stand. And it's usually instrumental. And I just find out what's new out there, and then I just slowly pick away like Pandora and figure out what it is I can actually tolerate.
So you curate a little Santa's list of the good list of music.
I do, because I got tired of fighting with people about playing, holiday music. I have to listen to it all day, every day at work. So I was like, listen, you guys gotta give me a break when I get home. But of course, they're in the spirit. So yeah, I basically take about a week and I curate this year's Christmas playlist that I won't shoot myself in the face over.
Oh, that's good to hear. I'm happy to report that Wham's classic Last Christmas is getting covered to death by all the young recording artists out there, which means that they appreciate it.
All I've heard, I can't tell you how many young employees I have, and they're like, have you ever heard of Kate Bush? And I'm like, yes, I have.
Yeah. Would it surprise you to know that I was once considered young and beautiful?
Right.
Brian, tonight is a great night, in part because we've got a great guest. You will know his voice from the podcast, How the West Was Cast, or maybe you've interacted with him in Salt Lake City because he is the chair of the Department of Film and Media Arts at the University of Utah. Dr. Andrew Patrick Nelson, how are you tonight?
Very well, sir. Thank you for having me.
Very glad to welcome you on. Is Christmas season just all over the place in snowy Salt Lake?
Absolutely. It's not especially snowy right now, but the Christmas season is upon us and really has been upon us since November 1st.
As soon as anyone has a chance, just climb up in the attic and grab those decorations. Time to pull them down. So, Andrew, you're in the Wild West.
Okay.
And your faithful horse is your companion.
Okay.
What did you name your horse?
Well, as Luke Askew tells Gary Grimes in the Culpeper Cattle Company, you don't put a name on something you might have to eat.
Oh, so you are taking the practical way here and just saying, you know what? Better not get too attached.
Yeah, I think that's good cowboy advice.
But that's pretty smart. Brian, did you take that same advice, or did you give your horse a name?
No, I've always sworn up and down that if I ever had a black dog, I'd name it Jessamy. So if I ever have a black horse, I'd name it Jessamy.
Jessamy.
Yeah.
Is that a special name in your family or history?
No, it was a World War I children's book, or the protagonist in a World War I children's book by Barbara Slay. Anyway, it's like a little golden book, but it had World War I themes due to the time that it was published.
The timing, yeah.
Anyway, the main character was a little girl named Jessamy. That was later incorporated into the Sandman series. It's actually the name of the Sandman's raven. So
that is a very cool answer.
Co-purposed, but yes, I was familiar with both, and I've always liked the name.
Good answer. Well, I'm in a unique position here because I've named several horses. The first was Cerberus Appleby. The second was Julius Pringles. The third was Dorothea Bramblejack. The fourth didn't live long enough to name. And the fifth, I named Usain Bolt the horse. Now, I never had a chance to name that fourth one, but I feel like in this scenario, if I had to pick the most beautiful name, I'd go with December Bride. So what is the last movie you saw, Andrew? And it does not have to be in theaters.
Last movie that I saw was Predators from 2010. Nimrod Antel, talented director. Adrian Brody and Alice Braga. My son and I are working through all of the Predator films. I think we're going to skip The Predator and go right to Prey, but we're 3 films in now.
I don't remember hating Predator. I think Predators was probably the best thing out until Prey.
Prey is something that's on my list because I don't watch a lot of new things. But I actually did see the Predators movie with Adrian Brody in theaters because I like Adrian Brody anyway.
So
it's not like I feel like he can do no wrong. I just like him.
I had to take a timeout about 5 minutes into Prey and make sure the dog didn't die. I have a thing about dog deaths in films, and I was like, man, I don't know if I can make it through this if something happens to this dog. So spoilers be damned, I went ahead and looked it up. And I said, does the dog die in Prey? And everyone's like, no, it's safe. And I'm like, sweet, we can continue.
Sweet. Andrew, are you familiar with the website doesthedogdie.com?
No, I am not. I was actually just about to ask if there was such a website.
It exists, and apparently, to much aplomb, it's very well regarded, apparently spoiler-free, something to just kind of take that, wipe the sweat off the brow. Like, okay, I think we're going to be fine.
And it makes me feel better, because now I know that there are not just like a few of me out there. There's apparently a lot of me out there where I'm just like...
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of people that need to know that. What was the last movie you saw, Brian?
All right, so this is kind of a weird one, and this is one that like I hesitate to recommend to people because it really just takes a certain kind of enjoyment to like a movie like this. I watched one called Song of Granite. It's about a traditional Irish folk singer in his life, and it was a great movie. It's not something that's going to keep you on the edge of your seat, but it was really beautifully rendered. And I don't know. It just that was something I'd earmarked for a while, and I finally got to sit down and watch it.
You had mentioned this to me or sent me something about it, and I think I remember seeing the cast list was full of some very Gaelic names, meaning that we've got some authenticity to that cast.
Yeah, the folk singer's name is Joe Haney, and he's somebody that I listen to. A lot of my Christmas music, as a matter of fact, is Celtic in origin. But he's known for just vocal singing, like not a lot of instrumental accompaniment, and it's just a fascinating movie, black and white. It's very stark in its landscapes and everything. So it definitely captures a very non-green feel for the Irish Isle.
Well, that sounds like a recommendation. I don't have one of those. My most recent movie was from 2022, Karen Gillan and Aaron Paul, starring in Duel, which I could tell you all the premise of it, but then you might actually want to see it, which is perilous, because it's not very good. It is art, ? And maybe that's what gives it some value to the people involved in it, was they were going for something in particular. But it's DUAL, though it does weigh heavily on a dual DUEL. And Karen Gillan plays 2 roles. So it's just an interesting thing. I don't recommend it.
Fair enough.
Speaking of movies to recommend, though, Brian, what are we watching tonight?
We are going to watch 1966's The Professionals.
The Professionals, starring Burt Lancaster, Lee Marvin, Robert Ryan, Woody Strode, Jack Palance, Claudia Cardinale, and Ralph Bellamy. This was released in '66 and grossed $19 million domestically. According to thenumbers.com, it placed 9th in the box office that year, ahead of Grand Prix and behind Alfie. The #1 movie that year, I've heard of this before, The Bible. The IMDb rating is 7.3. However, on Rotten Tomatoes, we have much higher percentages. Critics give it 89%. Audience score gives it 91%. So people look at this quite favorably. It garnered some nominations at the Academy Awards. Best Director, Richard Brooks. Best Screenplay, adapted from another medium, and Best Cinematography. Also nominated for Best Motion Picture and Most Promising Newcomer at the Golden Globes. Now, Andrew, this found your way onto the short list that you provided to us, and we chose it. Had you ever seen it before?
I had. I've seen this film a number of times. I've, of course, seen every Western, but this one I have seen more than once.
And for we'll say the project of this podcast, I don't know how frequently, maybe it's all the time, that you are sort of critically assessing Western movies, but what were your expectations coming in this time?
So coming in this time, so it's been a couple of years since I had seen it. I put it on the list because I think it's an important film in the development of the genre. I think it's a good film, but I think because of its place in history, because it's following certain films and certain other films come after it, probably name those titles later, tends to be overlooked. So I think this is just a great Western to recommend. So I'm glad you gentlemen were interested in chatting about it.
Absolutely.
Well, I was interested. I like to choose things I have not seen before. So I'll tip my hand. This was new to me. So my expectations, it's very easy when something is nearly 60 years old that you can avoid spoilers and trailers. Just find the movie, turn it on. That was easy for me. What about you, Brian? Had you watched it before?
I had never seen this. I used to just never watch old movies. I would watch anything current and within 10 years or so. But even diving back into the 80s, I had a harder time watching older movies. So I just, somewhere in the early 2000s, I was just like, nah, I don't need to watch old film. I can just stick around with, what's current and live
There's plenty of new stuff.
Live a happy life. That was stupid. I've slowly eroded that issue in my brain, and now I'm really, really digging. I actually watch more classic movies now than I watch current ones, and that's one of the reasons I jumped on this, because older westerns is a vacuum for me. I don't have a whole lot of experience with them. And I was super excited to dive into this one.
Well, we might have the perfect guest who's got some experience with Westerns.
He did say he saw it twice, or more than once. Excuse me, more than once.
Right. Well, I've got this question we typically ask about a lot of movies, but I wonder if it's different for Westerns in general. The question is, Andrew, does the movie hold up? But there's like a subtext to the question, which is, do Western movies hold up differently than other movies?
That's an interesting subtextual question. I think the movie absolutely holds up. I think it has, a great story, compelling performances, a number of really well executed action set pieces, interesting twist. So those are many characteristics we would ascribe to good cinema. As for that, subtextual question, I think I don't know if Westerns are that different than most other old movies in terms of being able to hold up over time. I think Westerns may enjoy certain advantages in that because they're already set in the past, people aren't necessarily judging the films against standards that they're more familiar with. So you can probably get people
That's kind of where my head went, is that there's maybe you call it the benefit, but the benefit of the period, it has to fit into a certain period, or at least it generally does so. So that makes sense to me. Brian, did you feel that this movie held up?
I think I would back the idea that because a Western is naturally set before the time it was filmed, I think there is some shield cover there. There wasn't anything in this, outside of the statement, do you have a problem working with a Negro? But I feel like that would be a statement that would be made at that time. So, there's in a time where we nitpick everything, I think that we can probably leave Westerns alone.
It's probably fair to say that if that statement didn't come up, it would be seen as that would be odd to not ask that question in that particular standpoint. I'll make it 3 for 3. I also think it holds up. And I also enjoyed it for my first watch and my second watch. I watched it twice in 2 days. And I will say occasionally my eyes will wander, whether that's to another screen in my hand or to something else going on outside. But I think the movie demanded my attention the second time. I wanted to make sure I caught the things I was supposed to catch. It's nice when you want to watch it a second time. Not every movie on this podcast is in that category. But we want to talk more about the movie, but we're going to do that after our ad break. Go and watch the movie. Come back. When we do, Brian is going to spoil the movie with his plot summary. So we'll see you after the break.
Welcome to the All 80s Movies Podcast.
I'm Bill.
And I'm Jason. And this is the podcast where we talk about the blockbusters, the flops, and everything in between from one of the freshest decades for movies, the 1980s. So whether you're a brain, a jock, a valley girl, or a Jedi, we've got some 80s classics for you.
Do these movies stand the test of time? Are we discovering something new? Is there an 80s movie we're finally watching for the first time?
Join us each week as we dive into the cinematic nostalgia that inspired and influenced a generation. From the hits to the cult classics, we'll discuss our earliest memories, favorite scenes, fun facts, and our not-so-favorite movie moments too.
It's the All 80s Movies Podcast, now available on all major streaming platforms. Please subscribe and happy listening.
And we are back. We're going to cover The Professionals here. We're going to start with a plot summary. Brian is going to describe what happens in this movie. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Then you want to listen to the next hour. Brian, take it away.
A wealthy Texan, J.W. Grant, contracts the services of 4 men, all of whom are experts in their respective fields, in order to go into Mexico and retrieve his kidnapped wife. The woman in question is being held for ransom for $100,000 by Jesus Raza, a Mexican revolutionary turned bandit in the closing years of the Mexican Revolution. Henry Rico Fardan, a weapons expert, Bill Dolworth, an explosives expert, Hans Ehrengard, a horse wrangler, and Jake Sharp, a trained scout and tracker, make up the team sent into the Painted Hills to rescue Maria. Both Farhan and Dolworth had fought alongside Raza in the revolution under Pancho Villa. They enter Mexico and witness Raza and company attack a government train and follow it to the end of the line. Once there, they locate the camp and come up with a plan of fast, violent action and distraction, only for Farhan and Dolworth to witness Maria about to willingly make love to Raza. Realizing that something was amiss with their task, they knock out Maria and spare Raza's life and flee toward the border. Raza and his men relentlessly pursue them into the hills, where Dolworth makes a stand to give the others time to escape. In his encounter with Raza, he kills all of the soldiers, including his one-time lover Chiquita. During the fight, both Dolworth and Raza are injured. The others make it to the rendezvous with Grant's men when Dolworth appears, having survived and spared Raza once again. There is a confrontation with Grant, and he is exposed as the one doing the kidnapping, and the professionals turn their backs on a fortune to let Maria leave with Raza as they ride back into Mexico.
And it's a long ride. We know that there's the harsh realities of the desert, and we've got this story right in the middle of it. Now, the movie's called The Professionals, and Brian, you said that there was a plan to get down there, and then I think we immediately jump into, well, we know how we were going to get here, and I think we're going to figure some stuff out. They have to get back, and it's a long way back. Andrew, we start with a plan. I like this roundup of professionals, the rounding up the posse, rounding up the gang, and only 2 of them know each other in this instance. This is kind of a comfort for Western fans.
Yeah, the film is certainly of its time in giving us a plot about a diverse group of professionals brought together for a certain task. This movie comes in the wake of another film in that vein, The Magnificent Seven, which came out in 1960. It's John Sturgis's American Western remake of Akira Kurosawa's The Seven Samurai. And then it anticipates later films like The Wild Bunch. So these are films about guys who kind of recognize their days and ways as Westerners are numbered. Modernity is here. The century is turned, but they see opportunity in mercenary exploits in Mexico.
And I think from what I understand, the 2 pals, Dolworth and Rico Fardan, they've done some work south of the border before, involving themselves in the business of war. Brian, this is something you brought up, that you know that he has a past relationship with Cici Chiquita, who we don't get enough screen time of. But we've got, as part of their past, we learn a little bit about them, but really, when they all kind of show up on the train together, we're going to learn about the plan. They kind of have to learn each other pretty fast. I think that comes across quickly.
Yeah, I don't think there was any real, it's kind of one of those things that even without a reputation or something, he's kind of reading off everybody's resume and they're all like, when you put a group of guys like that and you're talking about that kind of money, I think there's at least some understanding that they know what they're doing. At least as long as Sean Bean's not in the room.
That's crazy. We watched a movie on this podcast where Sean Bean survived. That's the craziest thing of all.
and it was another gathering of mercenaries to achieve a goal. So it's been a common theme this fall, and
Well, as I said, it certainly, some historians of the Western would say that this film is emblematic of a fundamental shift in the Western as we move away from lone gunfighter characters defending society to groups of professionals who can only exist apart from society, taking on these kind of mercenary jobs, and who, aren't really fighting for any greater cause. They're fighting for themselves. They just enjoy battle. They enjoy the companionship. So this film is, again, of its moment in that respect.
The life, the camaraderie, they come together. We have to bust Dulworth out of jail. And J.W. Grant says, yeah, sure thing. We're going to do that right away. And he get on the train. I think we learn that Fardan is making $40 a week. So what are we looking at? $10,000 in gold? You're going to be set for life. Am I right?
Yeah, if not for life, then at least for a few months, depends on how many, brothels south of the border you plan on visiting.
Now that's interesting that you bring that up, because we have very few instances, maybe even none, of gambling, of inside a saloon. We don't get those creature comforts in this movie.
No, these are men out in the wilderness, and the society is one of professionals.
Brian, what did you think about the harshness of the landscape that we are thrust into? You find yourself uncomfortable, at least I do.
Yeah, I especially think that, when Hans, it was Hans that goes down with heat, right? Early in the film.
Yes.
Yeah, especially in that scene, I was on the couch, it's 20 degrees here in Spokane. So I was on the couch under a blanket, and I'm watching that scene, and I'm slowly taking the blanket off. So, it's true. And the locales that they use to film this, like Death Valley and the desert outside of Vegas and places like that, I mean, they really do inspire an increase in body temperature just by watching.
Every winter, I do watch The Hateful Eight because it makes me feel extremely cold. I like being cold.
Oh?
So our men have to go, I would say the first battle is against the elements. You do mention that Hans faints. There's got to be enough rations and supplies for the people and the horses. Is that the whole reason that Hans is a part of the crew? Because you got to have someone that can handle the horses?
Yeah, I mean, you get that really interesting division of labor that you already talked about. So you have the dynamite explosive expert, you have the tactician, you have the scout, and then in Erengard, you have the seasoned horseman, the guy who knows animals, knows horses, knows what it takes to take care of animals to get you where you're going and then make it all the way back. And interesting, there's a lot of interpersonal drama centers on Robert Ryan's character, Hans, Erengard, as a kind of potential weak link in the chain, so to speak, because of his affinity for his animals and his disgust at some of the brutal measures that he observes both his new companions as well as the bandits undertaking.
And of his companions, we've got Dulworth, who is the one who suggests that the best thing to do would be to put these horses down. But you mentioned the scout, and we're talking about Jake Sharp here, who I believe in description, he might even be, based on something that you read, described as American Indian or Native American. He might be. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's an kind of implication that he's maybe like an Apache scout. Makes sense given the Southwest setting. Common thing for scouts to have some kind of Indian ancestry in the Western.
I did see it referred, I saw people non-committal on it, saying he was just a good scout and tracker, and then I saw people bringing the native aspect into it. So I never, I didn't see anything super definitive on that, but it was kind of a, like you said, implied to a certain degree.
And he was also a star football player at UCLA.
Woody Strode? Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, he has a remarkable life story. He's an amazing athlete and has a really good and important screen career. He's in John Ford's stock company, so we see him in a number of Ford's famous westerns. He has an important role in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. He has a starring role in Sergeant Rutledge. And then he goes on, after films like this, to appear in films like Once Upon a Time in the West, and then a number of Italian westerns.
But we did learn that, we bring them together, and there's an interesting comment brought up by, I believe it's J.W. Grant, when he's pointing at the newspaper article saying, you're going to go after Jesus Raza, or as he says, Jesus Raza. Where he asks, I believe he asks Rico Fardan, who's wearing his cardigan and his campaign cover, do you have any problems working with a Negro? Brian, did you catch this?
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I kind of raised an eyebrow at, because after pointing out that, on a newspaper, here's him riding with Pancho Villa in the Mexican Revolution, he then asks if he has a problem working with, an African-American, and you're just like, that's kind of a dumb question, and you kind of see it on Lee Marvin's face, like,
yeah.
Can we? No,
I think
continue?
I think that's actually, yeah. So that scene isn't so much like something uncomfortable because it's from the 1960s. I think the scene works within the context of the movie. It's an early indication of what kind of man Grant is. That maybe he isn't all that he suggests that he is, but it's also kind of a moment that brings them together. The look on Lee Marvin's face, just the disdain at being asked the question. Because it's just, we know in that moment that race, color, creed is of no consideration to these men. What matters is ability.
Yeah, and we get to see that ability on display as they go further south. I think if I looked at the map, I tried to zoom in on it a little bit. They mentioned something about El Paso. From the map, it looks like they might be south of Laredo, but essentially they're going towards the Sierra Madres. Something about Mexico, something about like those mountain ranges. I wouldn't be able to distinguish between where they shot in California, Nevada, and the smaller the provinces on your way to Monterrey. Like I don't know that stuff. It feels very real, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, geography is something that Westerns often play fast and loose with. Monument Valley is the typical example. We all know that Monument Valley is in southern Utah, northern Arizona, but it can be wherever it needs to be. It's just the West. And, similarly, the kind of southwestern landscapes we see in this film, I don't think most viewers are going to question whether or not this actually is Mexico. The West isn't, it isn't really a historical space in these films. It's more of just an imaginary one.
I think of only one time that the geography of a movie has ever really bothered me, which was a Hallmark Christmas movie called something like Christmas in the Smokies. Now, I'm from the Smoky Mountains, and I know that they're covered in trees and green and luscious. But they shot it in California because you can see the peaks of the Rocky Mountains behind them. And that was what made me turn it off, if not for the dismal writing and terrible dialogue. So this does feel like we are in hard Mexico. And we even hear from Fardan, I think it was Hans who says, how does anybody even learn to live here? And, men tempered like steel. They're a tough breed. These are men who have learned to endure. I want to ask generally to both of you, how do you feel about the way this film portrays the Mexicans?
I don't think anything really stood out egregiously. I do think that there is a old golden age of Hollywood standard for how they react in situations. It's the big grin, the, cock a gun, a little bit more feral, maybe. Like they seem a little bit more aggressive than usually your cool-handed gunslinger protagonist. But other than that, Raza didn't have that. So, it was one of those like henchman versus leader kind of dichotomies. I don't know. That was kind of my best read for that.
It is of the period, and that it is on the one hand still indulging in certain stereotypes, the sleepy demeanor, the broad expressions that you've talked about. But at the same time, what we actually see is a portrayal of something like a society, a Mexican society, a genuine community, albeit a bandit one. And the film is ultimately sympathetic towards these people and their cause. I should probably point out, too, that Jack Palance was not Mexican, to the best of my knowledge.
Well, yeah. Incredibly Ukrainian.
Eastern European.
Not
Vladimir.
Sadly, what we call brown
right.
face, remained commonplace in Hollywood much later than blackface did. Burt Lancaster,
Right.
one of the stars of this movie, plays a Mexican in a Western a few years later called Valdez is Coming. So it's certainly indicative of some historical blind spots.
Yeah, and the purpose of the question wasn't meant to shine a light on the habits of Hollywood were at the time. I think we covered last year, maybe even 2 years ago, we covered West Side Story, and we had that still going on as well. That was actually 15 years before that. But even still, it's easy. I think it's easy to you have Mexicans with a pistola in one hand and a botella in the other, and there's kind of one thing on the mind, which is we're going to go through the sack and pull out the liquor, or pull out the cigarillos, and we're going to. It did seem a little bit of a leading on that, but that was kind of the time. So this is
I think
meant to
my
drop a bomb.
General perspective on these is, this is a movie from the 1960s that is quite liberal in its sensibilities. I mean, the Woody Strode moment that we talked about earlier is indicative of that. And I think also I don't think that Raza's name is just coincidental. I mean, I think he's generally meant to represent, La Raza, the people. And to have Mexicans treated as a distinct society with value is, imperfect, but an important development in terms of Westerns.
We do learn, and it comes late, but we do learn that Maria and Jesus are childhood sweethearts, and Jesus was a stable boy, and Maria has always loved him. And in the end, the big millionaire is the bad guy. Surprise, surprise. And he's the one that kidnaps her away. It makes me look at the response. It makes me, the second watch is nice for this movie once you know the truth. Because if you flip the focus a little differently, then what we have is a team of professional kidnappers coming to fake an explosion, like an attack from the Federales, and then kidnap a woman away from where she actually wants to be. So all of the response back from we call them banditos, but the response from these people is these people just stole our master, like the man that that our leader just stole his wife away. And so the response is kind of appropriate here.
I mean, this film isn't, it isn't The Searchers in that it doesn't take too seriously this idea that, well, maybe to these folks, we're the bad guys. The Professionals is, on balance, a somewhat lighthearted, quite witty film. It's an action film. But at the center of it, it does ask that question, who are the good guys? And that's actually the film kind of, hinges on that question, which is posed explicitly by Bill Dolworth in the film.
Brian, what do you think about Dolworth here? Because I remember that line, and there's a lot of great lines in this. How do you think about our leading man? Or would you call him the lead man? My eyes almost always go to Lee Marvin, but how do you feel about Burt Lancaster here?
So without spoiling any of my superlatives or anything, one of the most exciting things about this film for me was the fact that Lee Marvin was in it, because one of the few older movies I had seen at a younger age was Dirty Dozen, and it endeared that character, his persona, to me for a really long time after that. So I was like, oh, it's a Lee Marvin movie. Sold. But no, or I guess I should say I agree with you that Lee Marvin is where my mind goes in terms of a lead. I don't know if it damaged my perception of Burt Lancaster or not, but doing my read-ups on this film and the fact that he butted heads with Lee Marvin so much, I don't know if that put me off on Lancaster a little bit, but I liked their camaraderie. I think they did an incredible job of not showing any friction between the two of them.
I wanted to say that. I didn't see it on screen at all.
Yeah. So, and even the conflicting reports about the why they were butting heads is weird to me. So it's just one of those things where I think that you had to have both of them. I think you had to have the two kind of contrasting, one's the kind of sagely mentor, even though I think Lancaster's older than Marvin in this. But
really?
he comes across as like the almost a father figure, and maybe it's because of the, running fast and loose and sleeping with other guys' wives and stuff that, Lancaster's doing a lot of the things you would expect the protege to be doing in a lot of these type of films. But no, I absolutely love their bouncing back and forth, and then obviously the fight scene at the end where Lancaster holds the ground against overwhelming odds.
Right.
You got to have them both. I mean, you just do.
Yeah, no, I think there's certainly important precedents in earlier westerns where you have a more straight-laced character, and then you have kind of a wild card, and they have this good cop bad cop relationship. So one precedent would be a film called Veracruz from 1954, where it's Burt Lancaster again in the kind of roguish role, and Gary Cooper's the more straight-laced cowboy. The gunfight at the OK Corral, another Burt Lancaster picture from 58, would be another example where Lancaster plays the straight-laced Wyatt Earp and Kirk Douglas is the more eccentric Doc Holliday character. So that's kind of a staple of westerns in this part.
Yeah, so Lancaster's 11 years older than Lee Marvin.
Yeah. What was Marvin? Was he 40, 42, 44, something like that?
Yeah, I think he was 42, and then Lancaster.
He had white hair coming out the womb.
Well, he's one of those guys like Sean Connery. It's like either you saw Dr. No or you assume Sean Connery always looked like Entrapment. So that's it. There were two Sean Connerys. There's Dr. No, and then there's everything. The Rock. That's the two you get. And if you grew up with The Rock, Sean Connery, that's how Sean Connery was born.
Right. It's like never having seen Dog Day Afternoon.
Right.
And knowing wait, Pacino was young once.
Yeah.
I didn't think about those two as best friends. I guess the way that you described it is like mentor protege, I think is maybe more appropriate. There was something that happened in this movie a couple times, and I don't think it was not Fardan to Dulworth, it was Fardan to the audience, where it wasn't like an accurate guess or some type of prediction. It was like the result of good planning from Fardan's point. So we have one of these sequences where they're going through a pass, and there's 8 to 10 men on horseback who meet them. And they call out, they ask if the group is lost, wondering what they're doing out there. And before the interaction happens, Fardan describes, this is how they're going to ride up. And if you see this, start blasting. Or I think what he says is like, let loose. He does this again later with like the upside down crosses. He does this again with like planning out like where they're going to go. There is a lot of planning involved, and I think Lee Marvin's character like makes the audience feel safe in a way. Like, I'm so good at my job that I'm actually going to tell you what's going to happen before it happens. Did you all notice anything like that?
I think that going into this mission in the film, I think that he had the outline, the blueprint of this pretty much wrapped up before they ever left. And one of the things I really enjoyed about this film in particular is his strategic placements along the way. Like, I see an opportunity here to give us an advantage, and he does it periodically throughout it. And
yeah, that's true.
And so it's like, yeah, the overall plan was probably in his head, but as they're going, he's identifying, things that will give them a better chance. So he's adding percentages to the success rate as they go. And that was cool too.
Well, Andrew, you mentioned some of the action sequences, and that was our first shootout. I wouldn't call Lancaster's character being jumping out the window after being I don't know if he's shot at in that bedroom scene, but I'd say our first proper shootout is that one where the leader, the last thing he says is "Go with God" before he does the exact move that he was predicted to do. So that's one of our sequences. But you wanted to mention it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the film again it's a lighthearted film, and it basically offers a kind of fantasy of military precision and professionalism. Where, Rico, and Brian, I think you're exactly right. He just has this uncanny ability to size up any situation and turn things to his advantage. I mean, and that, I suppose, begins with his recognition that he thinks he needs his partner, Dolworth, to be along for the ride. So, this all culminates in the rescue scene of Maria Grant, which just requires precision timing. It's all about this fuse is going to take this long. Once you light the the dynamite on the arrows, you've got 7 seconds to shoot it. It's just the precision is just, again, it's a fantasy, but a very enjoyable one. And the thing, everything more or less works.
It's also interesting to me, you see a lot of crossover in skill sets. So, like, in my approximation, outside of setting some charges, you have Woody using more dynamite offensively in the movie than you have Dolworth. You have Dolworth really in there for his gunfighting abilities more than his explosive use.
Right.
And so, and you have, Lee Marvin's character who does some fighting, but it's more the stealth stuff you'd expect the scout to do. Like, I'm the drunk guy bringing you a bottle of tequila, choke him out. You know what I mean? So I feel like there's so much blending of the skill sets where somebody else ends up doing what maybe a different member of the team would have been more
right.
That's why they were there for. So
anyway. Maybe the division of labor breaks down as there's a kind of synergy among the professional group.
Right.
I mean, in a way, it kind of points to there is a kind of underlying tragedy to all of this, and it's the tragedy that underlies most Westerns. It's this idea that these guys, they're amazing. They're heroes, but only within a certain context. And when times change, they don't have anything to do. So the first shot we see of Rico is him as, kind of an arms salesman.
Right.
And that image kind of sticks with me. I'm thinking, okay, well, that's what he's been reduced to. And when he gets out in the field, he gets an opportunity like this, something he can't say no to. It's not really about the money, obviously. He's a Superman, essentially. And these other guys are the same. They feed off him. And they're all, almost nigh invincible.
The paragraph you might read about this movie starts with 4 adventurers go to Mexico. Like, adventurer is not a job. Now, some heroes in Westerns
if you're
have
a Tomb Raider.
So, sure. If you're a Tomb Raider, then I got another tomb to raid tomorrow. Mondays, right?
Yeah, it's about time to tomb raid. Excuse me.
Some of our Western heroes have a star on their vest, and some of them work as coroners, and some of them are professional gamblers. But I think these guys are like, we are tacticians, and the professional must be able to also handle the dynamite, and also handle the scout work, and also handle the 6-gun. And all of these things. It's the mark of the professional. I found that I think of other movies of putting together the team, and I generally go toward more modern things, not the Western genre. And it made me think of Dolworth here. I think his screen value is in being kind of a face charm, even though he was brought on by Vardan to be the detonator, to be the explosive charge. In order to do that, he's also got to be the grease. He's also got to sneak in. And he gets to show that off in some pretty cool stunt work. We see Lancaster doing, I don't know how much of it is his own stunts, but we see him doing a lot of climbing, a lot of crawling. He was a trained acrobat before he ever started acting, or I guess before he went to the military, before he ever started acting. This guy's spry.
It took me about 15 minutes into this movie, it may be a little bit longer. It's after the first real gunfight that I just started thinking, oh my God, this is the Western A-Team.
Yeah.
It sums up because you're right. Lancaster is 100% face. You've got Lee Marvin's the Colonel. It's in lieu of the fact that you don't have a helicopter or something to fly. You've got these other guys in Western professions. But you're right. You've got the schmoozer. You've got the those parts. Those parts. You will see these personas collected again in the future.
Venerable action types. I mean, it's not to say that the Western becomes any other genre, but the Western was the main form of action and adventure cinema for 30 years. So it shouldn't surprise us that it established or helped codify some of these conventions that are, very venerable. The idea that you assemble a diverse group of people, each with a special skill, they have something to learn from one another, those skills bring them into conflict. I mean, those films are being made today.
The Western is the home, the bread and butter of the anti-hero. Some people who wear stars are good, some are bad, some are both. And that's Westerns is where that, the Clint Eastwood Unforgiven, we don't put labels on people here.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. It's not to say that there aren't, anti-heroes in earlier forms of literature or genres, but certainly at its best, the Western from its beginning has taken very seriously the idea that these men, because of the skills that they have a certain darkness, that the ability to kill other people is a serious thing. And it's kind of what marks the Western hero ultimately as a tragic figure. In the ritual of the Western, the Western hero supposedly always has to ride off. He doesn't always ride off. He often does. But, the answer to why he has to go is that something like, violence is occasionally required to protect society. But then the hero, because of his affinity with violence, his association with it, ultimately has no place in the society that he helps protect or bring into being. So the Western is serious about that.
Is kind of the places of debauchery and risk in a world where that's kind of been weaned away. Is that we used to duel each other, and then eventually we got to the point where we said, nobody has to die. So they started replacing the bullets and the pistols with wax bullets. And so, hold on. We've been killing each other. It's over. And the way that duels work was okay. He got hit with a bullet, so he was wrong. This guy was right. Yeah. So actually, daylight saving starts on November 15th, or whatever they were arguing about.
There is that question. Where is the place in society for these types of people, these types of rituals? Yeah. Certainly in a lot of Westerns, beginning decades before this one, we look to Mexico. Mexico is now the next frontier, the last frontier. What's interesting about The Professionals is it takes place after the Mexican Revolution. So, when the professionals are riding off at the end, riding back to Mexico, it's a very upbeat ending.
Where are they going?
What are they riding off to? I mean,
so is it completely over? I did say in the synopsis it was at the end of the Mexican Revolution. Had it already ended?
Well, yeah. So the film, I believe, takes place in 1917, which for some people is the end of the Mexican Revolution. Some people would take the end through the first term of the Mexican president in 1920. But this is sort of the end. And this is, Raz's character is somebody who would have fought under the command of Villa, but that's over. And so that's why he's turned to banditry. So, just like a lot of Westerns are set in earlier moments in the 19th century when the West is ending, this film is quite late, but it's at another one of those moments where they've kind of, once again exhausted the adventurous frontier. And as they ride off, smiling, looking at each other, not off into the sunset, but into the camera, the question remains, well, what are these guys, what could they do?
Well, here's an interesting hypothetical there, almost like a counterfactual, is that our Western heroes, when their world is when we're aging past their world and it's coming to an end, what do they fall to? Where do they go? What's next for them? Next might be Mexico. What was next for Jesus and Fierro and Chiquita? What was next for them? Well, it's still that same very similar lifestyle, only they're bandits. And I don't know Like the line is stealing from someone else or taking what's not yours. We do see their capability in how quickly they overrun the train, which the train that is armed with automatic weapons, by the way. This is a scene I wanted to mention. I think the scene is meant to establish that, these guys are tough, that they can take out. That is a well-armed train that they take out. We see Jesus run over a guy with a machine gun. Their marksmen aren't very good, I guess I should say.
Got a bunch of stormtroopers.
Yeah, they've got stormtrooper syndrome.
Well,
probably because Lee Marvin wasn't there to train them how to use them.
Right. It wouldn't be written until, I think, about 12 years after this movie came out. But literally the song playing in my head as they rode off into the sunset was Warren Zevon's Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner. It's literally, the idea that, you've got this mercenary for hire and he goes where the action is and when a revolution needs to be fought, there they are.
Yeah, and before we leave the revolution behind, it is mentioned, we have discussions of the past. We don't have flashbacks in this movie at all. We only learn of the past through storytelling, camaraderie, and also, character building. One of these, which didn't make a ton of sense to me, is learning about Fardan's wife. Now, that story is happening when Erengard says justice after Jesus Rasa is shooting some of the people from the train.
The Federales, yeah.
And I'm being open here. I was just kind of confused as to the importance of that.
Yeah.
I think there's some stuff that gets brought up in the past. Dolworth waxes poetically about the nature of dynamite, or his purpose in the world, and how this canyon's going to fill with rocks because of dynamite, not faith. There's some stuff that I almost feel like the lines were written and nobody raised their hand and said, does this need to be here? Or does this make any sense? And then there's the long amount of time that they spent fighting. Obviously, we know that Fardan and Dolworth fought with Raza, but do you feel like there was enough of that? Should we have had more of that discussion, maybe flashback to them fighting together or something? Or I actually found it a little confusing. I felt like it took away from my enjoyment of the movie. What do you think about that, Andrew?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, as for that exchange between Erengard and Dolworth, where Dolworth tells Erengard about Rico's wife, in kind of graphic detail what happened to her. I think that gets back to that question that Dolworth asks about who are the good guys. Maybe there's only been one revolution since the beginning, the good guys against the bad guys. The question is, who are the good guys? So we're at a moment, as you said, where Raza has just executed Federales, and Erengard is disgusted at this. And so Dolworth's role there is to suggest that, the people being executed were
worse,
guilty of, in his mind, worse. And that includes the murder, the brutal murder of Fardan's wife, and who's kind of alluded to her. Yeah, exactly. So to me, the film is constantly dealing with this question. Who exactly are the good guys? And I think the script is pretty thoughtful in the way that it kind of plants some seeds early. You actually have a character who explicitly asks that question, but within the context of, why would Anglos go to fight in the Mexican Revolution, right? The idea that maybe that distinction, that border, America, Mexico, Anglo-Mexican, maybe that's irrelevant. Maybe there just has been one continuous revolution, good guys and bad guys. Maybe there's this bigger story. I think the film then is planting these seeds, is developing this theme, and then brings us to a conclusion where we actually answer that question, who is the good guys and the bad guys? And the characters answer it for themselves, that they're actually doing what they were paid to do, and that's to, rescue a kidnapped woman from a horrible man.
I love the use of that phrase, later, upon completion. Yeah. We've actually done exactly what you told us to do.
Yeah.
The dialogue pieces from Lancaster and Marvin, I think they're 100% necessary. I think that when you do the jobs that these guys do, when you live the lifestyles these guys do, and you're not, if you are not just a pistol with a mouth, then you have this sort of introspection. You have philosophical qualms in your head that occupy a lot of your time, and that's what makes this movie not purely just an action Western flick for me. Mm-hmm. Like the dialogue in this is what makes it elevates this beyond just an action movie.
I mean, I think that's a good point. And one thing I could ask you guys about is we do have these great action sequences, but the big action sequence doesn't take place at the end of the movie. It actually takes place in the middle. Mm-hmm. And we have this lengthy sort of escape sequence. The last act of the movie is that. But when we finally get the confrontation between Dolworth and Raza, they actually stop and have a long, in your words, Ryan, kind of philosophical conversation, that it's not so much a duel at the end of pistols. It's actually, we begin dueling in words, which I always find interesting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think I might bring up a little more information about that when we get to our superlatives, too, because that was having the big wow moment of action in the middle. The end chase can sometimes just be 12 minutes tacked on. But knowing that they're fighting the elements, knowing that planning is still the way that they end up succeeding, and now let's finally, for the first time, I know it's been a little late, listeners, let's talk about Maria here. Maria as a character who we finally have as the mark, as kind of riding hostage. How do we feel about, Brian, how do we feel about like Maria's portrayal? Like this character is not just someone to be saved. She's got a strong personality.
So this movie, again, breaks some barriers of the time in its portrayal of strong female leads. You have, Chiquita, who is obviously very secure in her sexuality. And then you have Maria. I mean, she doesn't give any. She
doesn't say no. Her name's Cece.
So,
nice.
So, I mean, it definitely says, it speaks to that strong female persona. And, I'm not going to say that they aren't beautiful, because they casted well in that scenario too. But, she goes on her own independent monologue about what she's willing to do for the cause and what she's willing to do for Mexico. So, I mean, that's what gives this movie the good bones that it has. Writing is part of it, but it's also the fire and the vindication you can see in the characters' eyes as they pronounce what they're about. Because even Burt Lancaster is like, I live fast and loose. I mean, he believes in it. He believes in it wholly. He believes in it totally, and he portrays it that way. Same thing with Maria in terms of what she's willing to do for the cause.
Maria, it doesn't just sit idly by and is just swept away. I mean, yes, she does get knocked out and tossed into the minecart, but she makes a couple of attempts to leave. She reaches for Dolworth's gun to kill him. I mean, she's definitely got her vindication.
Well, I think what the heroes realize is that she really is one of them. She is a professional. She has a similar code of ethics. And in fact, I think they recognize that her cause is actually more just, because her cause, the revolution, is kind of inherent in her as a Mexican, right? The injustice of her experience is the injustice of kind of American colonialism, if we want to put it in those terms.
Yeah, rightfully so. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, Claudia Cardinale is, I mean, she's just a remarkable screen presence. I don't think there's a film she's starred in where she doesn't, command our full attention every time she's there, not only because she's a stunning woman, but because she just has such a powerful screen presence. But, the film's, twist that this isn't just a damsel in distress, that what they're actually doing is finding a kind of a kindred revolutionary spirit is one of the delights of this film.
She's definitely $100,000 woman.
Yes.
Yeah. Lancaster learns what makes her $100,000 woman, and it doesn't have to be from like wielding a gun either. It's through what she says and how she acts, and just that heart and soul with her. You know, it wasn't given the golden eye. Let's give Natalia a gun, and now she's an operative. Like, we don't have to do that. You can just build up the things that make the character who they are already.
It's the Jamie Lee Curtis True Lies treatment. Hey, you did this one thing that was dangerous. Now you're an agent. Ta-da!
Well, and I don't think we see enough of Chiquita, unfortunately. She's present, and we learn that she's capable. But she almost, I mean, hey, she's out of bullets. She almost gets Dulworth in the end, doesn't she? Or did she even want to? Is that what you guys?
Oh no, I think she would have blown. Yeah, she would have shot him in a heartbeat. It's in true fashion. We've been dancing around so many of my superlatives that I don't want to give too much away. There is something about a no apologies character, and Chiquita is probably the best in this movie for that. I am what I am. I'm very, very comfortable with it, you know, and she's probably one of my favorite characters from this film.
Yeah, no, I think there's certainly, you know, something of some of the stereotypes, Dustin, you were mentioning earlier, you know, especially the idea that there's a kind of a sensuousness or a kind of sexuality to the Mexican people is one of the more unfortunate stereotypes of not only Westerns but probably American cinema. In general, but you know, with that said, I mean, she's essentially second in command. And
yes,
she's also demonstrated to be a kind of professional, and that is why Dulworth is so attracted to her. Right? He kind of is gravitating towards these strong women characters.
Yeah, and unless he's making a joke, he's dead wrong. She can dance.
Yeah.
And what does he say? Yeah. She could take out a lick of soldiers, but she can't dance a lick. Sorry, Dulworth, you're wrong. She can dance, bro. Well, speaking of dancing, we were dancing around our superlatives. I'm ready to get into them, unless there was anything else in particular that like really stood out. That like, oh, I had to mention this.
I thought it was interesting that this was the first Western to feature nudity. That was a tidbit that I came across in my read up for this. Just wanted, not that it needed to or anything, just thought that was an interesting thing because honestly, I'd never thought about it.
Yeah, so 66. I guess by this point, at least female nudity is something you could get away with. You know,
it's from a distance, so
yeah, I wonder if
they consider it fairly tame.
Is it the first Western to feature nudity? I'm going to have to think about that because it's possible there could have been some very early Westerns that did. But yeah, okay, let's give it that for now.
I tell you what, if you do find another one, post it in the comments so we can have a discussion.
I'm trusting on this. I'm not trusting internet commenters.
Trusting the internet.
The
internet will tell us.
Western lover spelled with a U.
Actually, real quick, just a question.
Yeah.
Question for you, Andrew. Do you allow citations from IMDb?
Do I allow citation?
Class?
You know,
yeah, in your class.
You know, so once upon a time. So the short answer is no. But in my line of work, one thing that happens a lot is publishers will send me manuscripts for books that they're considering publishing. So basically, if anyone ever is going to write a book about the Western, I will probably at some point be sent the manuscript to kind of read it and give my opinion. And one of the absolute worst prospective books I was ever sent was filled with references to IMDb commentators in the comment section of movies. Now, there's nothing wrong with the comments. Some people can make very astute comments, but it was referencing them as though they were professional film critics. And that's where my mind goes immediately. So
based on the astute observations of Box Office Bro 69.
Well, it was something like that. It was what the book did. This is very funny. It would say, you know, as critic, you know, John Smith says, and then I was thinking, I don't know this film critic. he's been given a lot of authority here. He must be a big film critic. And then I would look, we're excited, and it was indeed like, film fan 69.
Part of this is probably just my ignorance, but how does IMDb police its trivia section? Is that all user generated?
Users. Okay, I think it is user generated.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of it, I mean, I guess unfortunately a lot of that is incorrect.
Okay. All right. Well, I may have just spouted off some BS then, guys.
No, it could well be true. Could well be true.
I just wanted to bring up, because we don't have a superlative about it, was that I did find myself enjoying the soundtrack both times that I watched it. I would say half a dozen times at least, I said, wow, this feels impactful and adventurous. There's only one instance where I didn't feel that way, and it was kind of a jolly little tune right after Dulworth says, I'll be the one to stand guard here and let you guys get back to the States. And it's this kind of like, it just sounds like Robin from Batman and Robin just took the kettle of tea off of the stovetop. It was very out of place. But otherwise, everything I thought was very good. Yeah,
so this score is by Maurice Jarre, who was David Lean's composer, I think, on all of Lean's films, as well as a number of other big ones, The Longest Day, Jesus of Nazareth, Lion of the Desert, I think, even up to something like Gorillas in the Mist. So certainly someone who's accustomed to composing sort of epic, rousing scores where adventurers are out in the landscape. I guess we're still putting in some of those touches from 1960s musical practice. That
a little whimsy here or there.
Yeah, don't age that well, maybe.
A little whimsy, a little twinkle of the eye, a little smile before he goes and puts 6 men in the grave. That's appropriate. But it's time to get into our superlatives. Ready, Andrew?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Who's your MVP of this movie?
So my MVP of this movie is writer-director Richard Brooks, I would say. Brooks had a long and interesting Hollywood career. As I'm sure pretty much every bio of him points out, he was able to successfully transition from being a studio man in the golden age of Hollywood and the studio system to working independently. He was able to bridge that divide. Now, in terms of Westerns, he only made 3 Westerns. Before this, he made a film called The Last Hunt. After this, he makes an interesting Western called Bite the Bullet. So this is his best Western, and I think a lot of it comes down to just his sense that he could make a lean Western, a really muscular action picture that played to a lot of his strengths. So I would give him the MVP.
That's a great answer. Brian, who's your MVP?
We're 2 for 2 on that. This screen adaptation was phenomenal. I'm going to talk more about the dialogue probably later, but there's so many good lines. The philosophy of this movie it has a lot of gems there too. And he also adapted Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and I'm a huge Tennessee Williams fan. And yeah, so I just hats off to him.
For me, the MVP, and it was because of The Dirty Dozen that I had that same, my attention was drawn to Lee Marvin. I think I gravitate towards the leader, the captain of the team, and I did feel as if he was the mentor of this band, of this group. And I feel like Dulworth seemed like he needed leadership, or he just needed that guy to have his back. When Dulworth gets into trouble, then Rico's going to be there to get him out of trouble and hand him a bottle of whiskey afterward. And that gave me a warm feeling. And
the whiskey
I was happy to have it. Yeah, for sure. Andrew, who's your best supporting actor?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, especially in a film where, as you just alluded to, none of these guys could do it on their own. Independently, they're kind of lost, but together they're professionals. This was a tricky one for me, but I'm actually going to go with Jack Palance. Palance is a familiar face from Westerns. He plays one of the villains in Shane. He later, after this film, appears in a number of Italian westerns. Comancheros is one of my favorites. And then one of his last great roles is also a western role in City Slickers. So I like him in this. I think he's actually very sympathetic. And what I especially like is when we get to that dialogue at the end where he's talking to Burt Lancaster, and we've only sort of seen him speak in sort of quick utterances up to that point, and then as he kind of slows down, it's just this very loquacious, thoughtful character emerges, and I think it takes a really good actor to move from one extreme to the other as Palance does. So he would be my best supporting actor.
And they're doing it in cover from one another, and he's also tasked with the difficult thing of doing that lying down, and he's also tasked with the difficult thing of having to pantomime directions to Chiquita and Fierro, who also is wanted for nearly as many 100,000 pesos as Raza.
Yeah, a lot going on there. A lot going on.
Okay, so Brian, who's your best supporter?
I went Lancaster on this one because I feel like the back and forth between Lee Marvin and him, you have to have both of them, but I think to end the movie the way they did, and I think it was a great ending, you have to have Lancaster, so I went with him.
Yeah, and you can't. I mean, it's hard to take your eyes off of him. I went deeper than normal because I had a different style of hidden gem, and I went with our best supporting is Jose Chavez Trau, El Orgullo de Torreon, Coahuila, the pride of Torreon. He's a Mexican actor. He's the leader of the smaller scout group. He's wearing kind of a formal coat, and he is the one that's talking to Dalworth as he's strung up upside down. His line delivery was more unique than any of the other, I think, Mexican actors giving any line deliveries. And he was a different style of, it's fair to say stereotype, but I also think he had an unpredictability to him. And he's played a lot of those roles, but it was in this movie that I said, this guy's standing out. He stood out both watches for me.
Cool.
Your hidden gem, Andrew.
Yeah, well, maybe it isn't so hidden because both of you alluded to it, but something I really like about this film is the way that the landscape in particular moments becomes a kind of character unto itself. That there are features of the landscape that the heroes sometimes use to their advantage, but that there are other moments where the landscape itself is their primary antagonist. And I really like this idea that the landscape isn't necessarily neutral. It's not just a beautiful backdrop. It actually affects the action. And the Westerns that can do that, I have sympathy for. So I like that.
Yeah, I feel the same way, whether it's a rushing river or the opposite, dusty plains and sand all over everywhere. Make sure you take your salt. Brian, what's your hidden gem?
I watched this movie before I went through the cast, so outside of the couple people that I can name visually, I didn't really realize that was Jack Palance. So once I realized that, I was like, oh my gosh. So, to me, he is L.G. Murphy from Young Guns. Like that's my introduction to him was Young Guns. And, he's had an entire career that is filled with intense Western villains. And I wouldn't characterize him as a villain in this film, but I will say I was shocked that was him. Like, I didn't make the connection just watching it.
Yeah, and a wonderful performance for, not a large amount of screen time, but a great performance. For me, it was not an actor. I went with the focus on the amount of small, personalized, or custom gear that any adventurer, outlaw, cowboy has on them at any time. We see some custom shaving kits, including ceramic bowls and razor strops. We see packable gun cleaning brushes and oils. We see specialized map equipment, Vardan's using a compass. There's a clear abundance of tobacco and rolling papers. You got to be prepared. There's plenty of brown party liquor, Like all that, you have to be prepared. Hans has like feeding buckets for the horses. We see them packing some of it up in like suitcases, and obviously we know that there are some mules with dynamite. But I've always thought that it's even more so than like the Boy Scouts always be prepared. Don't be prepared like a scout. Be prepared like you're in the Old West. Then you know you'll be fine. So that was my hidden gem. They really showed off that equipment. One of the hardest superlatives. Andrew, who are you going to recast in this movie?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess I don't. Maybe the historian in me is unwilling.
You don't want to.
Unwilling
Yes.
to touch it. I guess if forced, I think that there could be a case for somebody else playing the Ralph Bellamy role of Grant. Maybe. I think Bellamy is fine. You know, he'd been performing. Oh gosh, since I guess the 20s or 30s. You know, he's a familiar face. Who I would replace him with, I'm not quite sure, but I'm very reluctant to tinker with the past. If movies tell us anything, it's that usually doesn't turn out well.
Well, I'm glad that you were game. I've had guests before that said that they refused to answer the question. I threw them out the window.
No.
So I'm glad you were game. Who are you recasting, Brian?
This is just a fandom piece. The only person that I didn't need in terms of who played them in this was Robert Ryan. Although he does a great job. He doesn't need to be recast. But I'm a huge Robert Meacham fan. That's who I would put in that spot if I were going to recast this. And my wife will tell you, much to her chagrin, I'm a huge submarine movie fan. Basically, if it's a war movie with a submarine, I probably love it. So I kind of pulled him out of my Enemy Below hat.
What I actually went after Robert Ryan as well, not because of a poor performance, but just I was looking for something. So I've put this together as we have to live in a world where there just aren't enough Mexicans represented in Hollywood. We know this is the reality of the time. So if we have to accept that, then I would replace Robert Ryan with Charles Bronson. Just a tougher guy.
Getting the dozen back together.
Plus, exactly.
Dirty quarter dozen.
Plus, like, he's Lithuanian, so it doesn't really matter. You could even keep the Hans name, and that might work. But if we can fudge the timing a little bit, I did find just an absolute lovely, someone described the most beautiful Mexican actress ever. She would have been a little too old for this movie for the role of Maria, but I would have gone with La Doña Maria Felix as Maria instead. I mean, nothing against Claudia here, but I felt her accent, like being an Italian woman. I felt her accent. Same with Plants. Actually, you can tell, like you can just tell. It didn't take it away too much, but I think listeners of the podcast know that sometimes I'm picky about like accent work. But yeah, that's my recast. We've got 2 in a row: best shot and best scene. We'll start with the shot. Andrew, what's your best shot of this movie?
Yeah, this is a tough one because there's a lot of beautiful shots in this movie. But what I ultimately decided on, and this is a moment that we alluded to earlier, as the professionals with Mrs. Grant are fleeing, they're running out of water. They've just had to shoot one of the horses. You know, Mrs. Grant is kind of collapsed, and she's given some water. And there's this great shot where Woody Strode is behind her, and we can kind of see that he's digging in the ground with his knife, doing something. And what he's actually doing is picking off pieces of salt for her.
Right.
And so it's a great shot. You see the landscape, staging in depth, very beautiful. And then we get the payoff where Strode, very gently says, try some salt, ma'am.
Ma'am? Yeah. Yeah. This will help. Right. Well, and it also reminded me that, if she grew up in this area, she's around other hardened folk. Like, she probably knows that. She was also being a little bit of, part of her role was to not make it easy for them to get out of Mexico. So, and anything to potentially slow down. But yeah, a lovely shot as well. Brian, what's yours?
I went with it's kind of a shot up from the ground, but it's the shot of Chiquita putting her revolver under
Yeah.
Lancaster's chin. And then, and I know it's not part of the shot, but her saying, "I am not lucky." Like that was great.
Yes, it was. I felt that the sound, like the Foley sound of that click, was like a little light for the size of her pistol. I thought it should have been a heavier click, but even still, because hey, I had never seen it before. I was like, oh, what a killer moment. My shot is when Maria is racing through the canyon at her first chance to get away on a horse, and the fuse is catching up with her. And you have kind of, it's not overhead, but it's kind of at a 30-degree angle. It was claustrophobic in a good way. It was dangerous. That explosion, based on how they shot it, should have killed her, but we didn't want that. So it was just a big, exciting moment. And the plan worked, and Raza and the men had to go around. So I just thought that was such tension building in one shot. Best scene, Andrew.
Yeah, this is another tough one because lots to recommend in this particular film. But I guess I would say in general, it's probably bigger than a scene. It's a sequence. It's the quote unquote rescue of Mrs. Grant sequence. So all of the planning comes to a head in what I described earlier as a kind of a fantasy of military professionalism. It's just as exciting as you could possibly imagine. But within the scene, there is this important twist. So we not only get a payoff, but we also set up the last act of the picture, which to me is masterful filmmaking.
Excellent.
Yeah, the last half has so much more weight than I really expected it to. Because at first I was thinking, how do we get here so early? And then we get a great payoff. Best scene for you, Brian?
Let's see. It's the monologue. Well, it's not purely him, but it's the Burt Lancaster's conversation about there only being one revolution. Like, I thought that had so much import on this movie, especially given the twist that they face at the end is, are you really the good guy? And it's not something. It's something that's addressed in a lot of Westerns, but I felt like I just felt it a little bit more deeply in this one. And if it hadn't had that scene, I think it would have lost a lot.
My best scene, it's the Dalworth's last stand. It is, for all the reasons that Andrew mentioned, the dialogue, the palaver, I guess you call it. When you see it for the first time, you really don't know how it will go. Most of the comfort of the previous encounters had your leadership, your seasoned, we think we know how this is going to go. Well, Dalworth doesn't have his advantage. He doesn't have his ace in the hole in Farden here. This is just him. And I felt like he was really up against the odds. And so that tension and that the payoff you get for it is really something to cheer for. And so that was a great scene for me. How about the best wardrobe or best makeup moment, Andrew?
Well, the one that stood out for me, and maybe this is for the wrong reasons, but there is a moment in the lead up to the raid when Lee Marvin's character Rico, simply by donning a poncho and a sombrero and picking up a bottle of tequila, is able to pass himself off as a member of Raza's men, which, again, it's pure fantasy. He even speaks in Spanish. No problem.
Right.
But as a moment about wardrobe, that certainly stood out for me.
Brian, I'm going to jump the line here because that's actually mine as well.
Oh, no kidding. All right. Great minds.
As well. And the thing I love about it is he wears his campaign hat, which is kind of that. I was thinking like a colonel's hat, but it's like the Montana hat, the peak with the 4 pinches up top. He looks great in that hat. He always looks great in that hat. But he wears his sombrero with the chin strap on the back of the head, the same way that he wears his campaign cover. And his gloves are bright yellow, and he just blends right in. So, yeah, that's mine. Brian, you can finish this out with yours.
It's got to be his Lee Marvin's sweater in the very beginning, the cardigan in the beginning of the film. It's like he showed up to set and he's like, "I'm not comfortable without this." It reminded me of his Dirty Dozen sweater, the army green sweater. I was just like, I need my sweater. It's hot as hell outside, but I need my sweater.
That cardigan's great. It's got 5 buttons on it. The buttons are brown. He's wearing a white collared shirt underneath it with a black tie. That shirt, the reason I know this, Brian, is because there's a website that puts out like how to put together the classic look from cinema. Mm. And the first time I saw that website was when we covered Collateral in 2004 with Tom Cruise's suit. And the amount of detail that people could figure out about the suit was like, whoa, couldn't believe it. And they've done the same thing with that outfit, with the cardigan and his Montana hat. And it's fun to read. I'm not like a GQ guy. Mm. I don't know all that info, but it's pretty cool to read. On that article, I saw that particular shirt he's wearing actually wouldn't have been introduced until the late 20s. So there's like...
I think that's what got me on it too. Like I was... Well, because I was watching, he's using a World War I machine gun. Like that's the gun he's demonstrating at the beginning of that. And I was looking at that cardigan and I was thinking, I feel like this is a decade early.
Oh, wow.
So,
yeah,
that's
eagle-eyed viewers.
No, I mean, it wasn't, I wouldn't have called it out that way. Like, I'm not going to be like, hey, the cardigan or the male cardigan didn't get introduced until blank. It's not like that. It's just, I went into this thinking Western, even with early 1900s in mind. Like, I went into it thinking Western, and the cardigan was just, it is just a little off. It was just a little off to me.
Well, we've got 2 left, a very hard one and a fun one. Andrew, you have to change one thing about this movie. What are you going to change?
Yeah, reluctant to change anything, but in the spirit of the exercise here, I think that as much as I like the opening of the movie, where we really just get right down to it right away, I kind of wish I had a somewhat greater sense of where each of the 4 professionals were at the start of the movie.
Like geographically?
No, in terms of their careers, their personal lives, their personal development, let's say. I think the movie might have been a little bit richer if we had a clearer sense that they were, unhappy or dissatisfied or out of place or wandering at the start of the movie, and that it was this enterprise that, as it brought them together, that kind of gave their lives meaning again.
Really double down on why they need to take this job or want to take this job. It's I agree. I think that'd be wonderful. Brian, what's your change one?
Robert Ryan's lung cancer. It's what prevented a sequel to this, and I seriously would have watched it too, like immediately upon completion of this. I've been like, all right. The first thing I did look up was, did they do any, like even a prequel movie, about their time with Pancho Villa would have been cool. So I wanted more. Usually my change one thing involves wanting more, especially on a movie I like. So Robert Ryan's lung cancer is my change one thing.
I'm actually going to piggyback right off of what you said, not about the disease, but it's about the prequel. I'd love, give me just 5 minutes. This is longer than I thought it would be, and a lot of it is focusing on just the harshness of the environment. If we could take some of that harshness time and put that time towards, let's see the ones who knew each other before, Chiquita,
right,
Raza, let's see them in some situation. We don't have to start the movie with it, but like I said, this movie was devoid of flashback, and I'm not saying you have to have it, but it would be cool to know more about that. So, like, I would be totally on board with a prequel, seeing them fighting back in the older days. Let's finish out with best quote, Andrew.
Well, I've already said one important quote. Dolworth's question. The question is, who are the good guys? There are a lot of great lines in this movie, and the one I'm, I guess, going to go with is the last line of the movie, which I guess is you need the context. So the last thing Grant says to the professionals is, you bastard, and he's talking to Rico, and Rico responds, "Yes, sir. In my case, an accident of birth, but you're a self-made man."
It's cold-blooded. That's awesome.
And you're not wrong. This movie is littered with great quotes. I actually, I had written several on sticky notes that I had. I'm still a pen and paper guy, so I had sticky notes all over the place saying, "Oh, I need to. Maybe that's my line. Maybe that's my line." And in the end, I went with none of them. I ended up with. So what else is on your mind besides 100 proof women and 90 proof whiskey and 14 karat gold? Amigo, you just wrote my epitaph. That is a great line.
That's cool. Yeah, there are very, very many good ones. I mentioned mine earlier, the how in the name of God does anyone live here long enough to get used to it? Men tempered like steel, a tough breed. Men who have learned how to endure. We were flooded with incredible quotes. Before we assign a star rating to this, I want to give Andrew a chance here to plug your podcast or anything else that you'd like to.
Sure. So I am with my intrepid co-host, Matthew Chernoff, who is a screenwriter and a journalist for Daily Variety. So I'm a co-host of a podcast called How the West Was Cast, which is a podcast all about the Western movie genre. We talk about different types of Westerns, individual films. We interview filmmakers and other people involved. So you can find us anywhere you get your podcast, wherever fine podcasts are sold, Apple, Spotify, and so on. And you can find us on social media at Western Podcast. And then I guess if you want to know more about me, my website is andrewpnelson.com.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And we will give you the honor as our guest. We do a 0 to 5 star, 0.5 star being the worst, 5 being the best, and you are allowed to go half stars if you want. How do you rate the professionals?
I give the professionals 4 out of 5 stars.
Excellent. It sounds appropriate to me based on the things you were saying. Sometimes, and I think Russell's the biggest culprit of this, sometimes, especially with like film history, we have someone who will, because of the importance of a movie, they will inflate the score.
Oh.
And say, well, because this movie... I think I listened to Russell dog Hellraiser for an hour and 20 minutes and then give it 5 stars or something like that.
Yeah. That's perfectly fair. Well, we all know that bad movies can have important roles to play in film history.
All right.
Hey, listen, I've always contended that I run on a 10-point scale. 1 through 5 is based on the film's actual credibility and chops, and then the next is the rewatchability and my love for the film. So you can get a 6, and it could be a completely dog film.
Whip crack.
But I love it. I love it 5. It gets 1.
That's fair. You kind of have the parallel ratings. I like that.
Well, so what is your rating this time, Brian?
I'm going 4 stars on this one. This was thoroughly enjoyable. I had a blast watching this movie. I actually watched it 3 times. Then I told my wife, I actually think you'll like this one. So there might be a 4th one in the works. But yeah, this was absolutely terrific.
So I came into the podcast giving it a 3 stars because there were some things that were taking away from my overall enjoyment. That being said, I had a chance to chat with y'all, talk about the Fardan's wife thing, talk about spending so much time on the harsh reality of the desert, talk about the importance of the Mexican Revolution, to talk about would it have been better to see more time with Chiquita and Fardan and Dulworth and Jesus fighting together. Then there was also something I didn't bring up to you guys at all, which was it seems like their code, the potential that they are, well, we took a contract and that's what we're going to do. In the end, we've got 60 dead Mexicans. And for the end of the movie to end, you only needed 6 more dead white dudes to get away with the money. Yeah, riding off into the sunset's great, but there's 100,000 gold pieces right there. What's wrong with killing the millionaire? Yeah. But because I chatted with y'all, it actually moved my meter up to 3.5 stars. Because it's very enjoyable, but there were just some things I couldn't get out of my head. But it was such a great recommendation to watch.
But it's interesting you brought that up because It's interesting you bring that up, though, because one of the few things that took me out of the plot of this movie was why the millionaire didn't mow them all down.
Yeah.
And just take his wife. Like, literally gets his wife back for free. So, like, I just, you could go either way with this. I could see them not attacking because they were tired and, you know, exhausted from everything. But I was like, you got 5 guys on horses just sitting there watching this dude's wife ride away. And I'm like, they could just kill them all and then take the woman.
There's a famous story about a much earlier Western, John Ford Stagecoach from 1939. In that film, there's a very famous scene where a stagecoach is making a mad dash across the plain and is being besieged by Indians. And the filmmaker, John Ford, was once asked, why did the Indians not just shoot the horses? Because if they were to shoot the horses, you know,
we don't have a movie.
Makes a lot of sense. And Ford's answer was, because then the movie would have been over.
There we go. Yeah.
So.
I have contended for years, if they just listened to Jack Bauer, the show would have been called 3.
I have not heard you say that before.
Yeah.
And I think the thing, it comes at the end. If it had come like way earlier, it was at the end occasionally. And this happened to me with 3:10 to Yuma. Is sometimes upon like my first initial watch, sometimes the ending doesn't quite resonate with me yet. But it was only after listening to y'all that I really got a better understanding of this one. Now, this is where we would normally be selecting a movie for next week. But next time, listeners, on the Retro Movie Roundtable, we have our year-end special, where we review our collective rankings on all of the movies that we covered in 2022 and hand out a slew of super fun superlatives. So line up Auld Lang Syne on your playlist. We are closing out 2022 with a blast and welcoming in 2023. I want to thank Andrew for coming to the podcast. A cool crossover. You guys are monthly, right? You come out with a How the West Was Cast every month?
Yeah, one a month.
Awesome. And I did listen to the Hateful Eight episode with the costume designer who also filmmaker as well.
Courtney Hoffman, yep.
Thank you for the name. Yeah, Courtney was cool to listen to. And thank you, all the lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable. We invite you to reach out to us. We want to hear from you. Subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a like on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at movie_retro. Email us at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com. Producing and providing this podcast is fun, but not free. We invite you to support the show at our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/retromovieroundtable. Any contribution is much appreciated and will go towards making the show better for you, the listeners. As always, thank you for listening. Be good to each other and watch more movies. Brian?
Fast is fine, but accuracy is final. In a gunfight, you need to take your time in a hurry.